Hello, everybody. So welcome to this week's IT Topic Chat. Matt Feldman here. I'm joined by Ann Price. And today we have fantastic, oh, and Susan made it today. Hi, Susan. Susan Wolf made it today. We have a panelist of Kate Schufelt, Molly O'Connor, and Elizabeth Grimm. Kate, do you prefer that we use your middle name as well? I don't know.
So I made things difficult, and I actually just have two last names. So
we should call you Kate Bassan Schufelt. Am I saying that correctly?
Bathen.
Bathen.
Mm-hmm.
I'll get it. We'll practice. All right. Very good. Well, the topic today is about the three panelists will be discussing their transition from going from part-time to full-time, which I think is a completely interesting and relevant topic that we in the independent consulting TIG talk about all the time, because we're always thinking or a lot of people ask us, how do you make the decision? How did you do it? What was it like? Are you gonna be able to make enough money to survive? All these things. Tell me about health insurance. All these things. Anyway, so that's what they're here to talk with us about. And with that, Kate, I just talked with you. Why don't you give us a little bit about your origin story? Tell us about how you made the decision to go full time, and then we'll go on to Molly, and then we'll go on to Elizabeth.
Okay. So I'm Kate Bathen Schufelt. My business is called Thrive Nonprofit Solutions, and I'm based in Indianapolis. My background, I have an MSW and an NPA. Matt, my MSW is actually from St. Louis U. So, yeah. And I spent a lot of my time outside of consulting, working in social service organizations, child services, child welfare court system as well. And spent a lot of time working in youth work, essentially. I lived up in South Bend, Indiana, for several years, and I was connected with a consulting firm up there called Praxis Strategies and Solutions. So I worked with them for a few years, and my husband's job took us to Arkansas for a couple of years. So I had to transition out of consulting for a little bit, but whenever we got the opportunity to move back to Indiana, I was doing the job search and everything, and nothing looked as good as what I used to do. So I started reaching out to my former employer, some of the other connections that I had here in Indiana. We also have a great resource here called the Indiana Youth Institute that essentially has a pool of consultants that they, whenever youth organizations reach out to them regarding program evaluation, strategic planning, things like that, they have a pool of consultants that they can essentially subcontract with. So that was another big connection for me here. And after some phone calls, after some coffees, it kind of started seeming like if I wanted to do consulting, I could get back into it. And I started out essentially taking subcontracts from my former employer and Indiana Youth Institute while I was trying to hustle and find my own contracts. And I essentially did consulting half-time, and I was able to adjunct at here in town. We have Butler, and then also the IU system. So I kind of supplemented my consulting income with teaching income until it got to be too much.
So follow-up question on that. I mean, so what was your calculus? how did you decide? What was it? What was that? What were your, did you do like a cost benefit analysis? Did you say to yourself, it's a big risk, but it's a risk worth taking? I mean, to talk us a little bit through your mindset on that.
Yeah, so even just the beginning discussions of going into consulting for myself anyway, the entire time, it wasn't just me thinking through this, it was also my husband, because any decision that I make regarding my business and how my income might be affected also impacts our personal finances, right? So there was a lot of open communication about kind of what do I need to make. I was very aware that, especially starting out, and who knew how fast I could actually grow, like what I started with was not going to be enough. I needed supplemental, right? You know, if adjuncting didn't work out, I was prepared to, you know, drive Lyft for a while, right? So that's just the beginning of it, but the part of what allowed me to kind of take that leap is having his job and the stability of that, his insurance, right? All of that kind of allowed me to have the flexibility to kind of take the initial leap. And then whenever it got to be the teaching and the consulting was too much, it was because my project base had grown enough that I was at the point to where the teaching started keeping me from working on my projects. So that was the shift for me, because my priority was the consulting.
Well, that's great. Molly, let's transition to you. Why don't you give us a little bit of your background? Talk to us a little bit about how you made the decision.
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Molly. Yeah, a little bit of my origin story. I kind of want to talk about even prior to me even knowing what evaluation was. So I was born in St. Paul, Minnesota. And if you didn't know, St. Paul is based on the stolen lands of the Dakota people. And I grew up near nature and in a house full of animals, which is probably one of the many reasons why I fell in love with natural resources. I initially got a BS in biology from the University of Oregon, and my focus was in ecology and evolution. And I was going to stay in Oregon and do field work and count bees in a field and live my best life. At least that's what I thought when I was 22. But I ended up moving back to Minnesota because my grandma had dementia and I was helping my mom take care of her. And for those 5 years, when I moved back to Minnesota, and it was just kind of the classic figuring out, who am I? What am I doing? I got a bachelor's in biology. What's my purpose? But I've always been a helper personality. And I ended up I was a childcare provider for Minneapolis Park and Rec. What else? Oh yeah, I was a kayak and snowshoe instructor. So I always ended up in these hands-on / educator positions. I even did 2 years as a personal care assistant and independent living specialist for adults with disabilities, because I have a lot of family with mental health and cognitive disabilities. So anyways, in all these jobs, I ended up burning out. And I should also mention, while I was working these multiple part-time jobs, I was applying for full-time positions, being a coordinator or manager somewhere. And I always got the thanks for applying, but we picked someone with a master's. And I just thought, shoot, I guess do I need to get a master's or something? Luckily, I'd taken the biology GRE right after undergrad. And by the way, full disclosure, I bombed it. And I was like, I'm never going to get into grad school with this score. But in the end, my GRE was going to elapse. And I'm like, well, I should apply. Maybe someone will take me. And I just luckily got into the Natural Resource Science and Management program at the University of Minnesota. And I went in thinking, oh, I'm going to get a master's to become an environmental educator, because that's what I had been doing. And through that process, that's how I found evaluation. Someone told me that, if you're going to be an informal educator, knowing about evaluation is a really important part. So that's when I first took my first class and met, I don't know if you know the name Jean King, but Jean was my professor and just changed my life. I learned that evaluation was kind of everything I was looking for. It was brought in that helper part of me that I wanted, but it also kind of helped stimulate my brain and allowed me, who tends to be more of a quieter, retrospective person, to I guess just feel more comfortable in working. So anyways, I ended up getting my quote unquote dream job in grad school. Then after grad school, I got an environmental educator and evaluator position at a local natural history museum. And I was like, holy crap, that's crazy. But then I don't know if y'all have had this experience, but the place I worked at ended up being really toxic. And it took me at least 2 years to figure out, like, oh, I can't work here. This is really bad. And that's also when I learned about white supremacy culture and how it shows up in workplaces. So anyways, how I ended up becoming a consultant was, as I was trying to get out of that work spot and work somewhere else, I had just been offered a full-time position to be my first ever full-time position to be an internal evaluator. But then COVID happened and that offer got taken away. And I ended up being unemployed just unexpectedly. And I was, as the pattern of my story that I've been saying, I was really burnt out. I also was really wound up. I hadn't taken time to heal from grad school, from all other little life traumas that happen. So in the end, and then also with unemployment, I was able to just kind of sit and reflect, really just take that needed time for myself. And when I got out of that, the darkness that was reflecting on my demons, I'm like, I don't think I can be internal right now. Also, there's no jobs, so I should just go independent. So that's how I ended up becoming the CEO of Cocoa Canary Consulting. And with full acknowledgement of the privileges I hold, it's honestly the best decision I could have made.
So quick, before we go to Elizabeth, are you wearing Birkenstocks to socks right now?
I'm wearing no shoes.
No shoes, okay. Because this is a condition, I think, based upon an exchange we had in emails of her coming on, that being independent meant that she could be comfortable in dressing however she wants, right? Am I right with that, Molly? It's
true. And I will show up at a conference in Birkenstocks and socks, just because that's how I roll.
How she rolls. She's just living out her perfect self. Elizabeth, why don't you share your background with us?
Thanks, Matt. So there's definitely some similar themes between Kate and Molly in my journey. So I have always been a lover of puzzles and always wanted to kind of figure out how things worked. So I was that nerdy kid who would do math workbooks and puzzles in the summer because I hate the heat, just for fun. And so I started college thinking I was going to go into neuroscience. I've always been good at math and science. I liked how the brain worked, and very quickly realized that was not my path in life. fell in love with psychology and research, and was like, oh my gosh, it's so cool. There's actually a career of research where you can learn about people and you can geek out about math and you can ask people about what they're thinking. And then I realized after getting a degree in psychology and kind of being on the track to become a clinical psychologist and researcher, that I was totally missing the connection to the community. And that was not going to be, again, my path in life. So, you know, those like circuitous routes that you see, the memes online, I feel like sometimes that's how my evaluation career path has evolved. And so I took some time off between undergrad and grad school, knowing I wanted to pursue a graduate degree, but not really knowing if it's not going to be clinical psychology, what the heck is it going to be? And ended up working at a homeless shelter for women and children, where again, I just fell in love with the community work. I fell in love with the field of affordable housing and work to end homelessness, and started realizing, you know, we're talking a lot about how effective this program is, but I'm not really sure that the stories I'm hearing and the data we're talking about are in alignment. And I started asking myself some big questions about that. And it wasn't for a few more years after that that I figured out that, heck, that is actually a career called evaluation, and you can make a living through that. So I went and got a master's degree in social work and public health. My social work degree is actually in policy and evaluation from the University of Michigan. And that set off this whole trajectory of dreaming and thinking about consulting as a career. And so mostly I consult with nonprofit organizations, community organizations in the social service and public health sector. So I started off actually during grad school doing my social work field placement that's required of all social work students at the University of Michigan Evaluation Center. And that's where I got my first side of my feet wet in the whole consulting realm, and really loved being able to work with the clients, being able to be out in the community, talking to community members, and really understanding holistically what's going on with the program and the participants who are seeking services from that program. So then I graduated, needed to find full-time work. I've cycled through a couple different positions, anywhere from policy analysis to evaluation consulting full-time. And as Molly was saying, learned a lot about toxic work cultures and all of the things that go along that. And I was finding in about the past 6-7 year period that I was really passionate and loving all of the work when I was working one-on-one consulting with my clients. And I was really struggling, not feeling like I could live into my values within the organizational structures that I was operating in. And so I had consulted on the side. I took my first part-time, really small project back in 2016, and never advertised that I was consulting on the side. Some people just kind of heard and would call me. Did some small projects from 2016 until 2020. 2020, the pandemic happened, and lo and behold, my part-time consulting practice grew exponentially, and I got the biggest independent consulting project I had on top of other smaller projects. And so I started to have to ask myself those big questions of, you know, it's not realistic to continue at this pace. I was starting to find myself work nights and weekends, and I'm someone who tries to only work a 4-day week max. So that was really interfering with my work-life balance that I really value, and really try to set boundaries to maintain. And so in April 2021 of this year, I said, Elizabeth, you are putting up artificial barriers for not taking this leap. And you need to invest in yourself, and you need to do that. And you're going to see what happens. So I filed for my LLC in April of 2021 and resigned a couple of weeks later and have been officially on my own since about mid-May. I should say, and I think we might talk about this in a bit, but for me, I am the sole income earner in my household. So making this leap was risky. I am an adventurous person, but I am not a financial risk taker. So that was definitely on my mind of thinking about how to set this up. And the other biggest decision in my factor is that I have type 1 diabetes, and we are very expensive to insure, and medical insurance is essential. And so again, being the only person who can insure myself and not rely on a partner for benefits, that was something that had been holding me up for years. So that took a lot of consideration too. But I realized all of those things could, had solutions. They just often took a little bit of creativity and a lot of money, but they were not insurmountable barriers like I was making them out to be from a fear-based mentality at that point.
So that's a pretty stressful position to put yourself in, but you say you're not a risk taker, but it sounds to me like you took a risk.
Matt, it's interesting. So some people on this call know, like, I spend my weekends hiking up very tall mountains and, we'll jump off cliffs. So I'm adventurous in that way. Like, I like adrenaline, but financials and finances, not so much. But I had a couple of mentors who said, Elizabeth, what is the worst thing that could happen here? I was like, I'm going to fail. And they said, exactly. The worst thing that could happen is this fails and you get another full-time job.
Yeah, that's what I tell people all the time. We have
I said, you're
skills,
right. You're right.
I mean, look at our skill set. We're in fantastic position to fail, right? If we fail, then we go get a job, right?
Luckily, yep. And that reframing was just it was so helpful. It took this really big, daunting thing and it just put it back into that level-headed mindset of, okay, all of the job opportunities are not going to dry up across the entire world because you started your own independent consulting company. There will still be other opportunities later should you want or need them, because you could also want them. Maybe I didn't like it when I got into it. It's failure. It's not failure. It's just your situation and your mindset has changed and you adjust, like we're all doing, and you've heard about all of our career twists and turns so far.
Molly, Kate, did you have any reflections on this conversation?
Yeah, so thinking of what Elizabeth had mentioned, kind of the risk, being risk adverse whenever it comes to finances. I would say that the act of going out on my own was scary. And I'm not a super risky person, but it was very calculated. It was not something that I just kind of jumped into. There were discussions about finances, about because we were also moving at that point from Arkansas to South Bend, or back to Indianapolis. The house that we were looking at to rent, does it have a space for me to work? That kind of stuff. So it was very calculated.
I guess in response to talking about calculation and talking about privileges that I hold, I didn't have much of an opportunity to calculate. It just was kind of an unexpected situation. So I ended up just kind of jumping into consulting. But I'd always wanted to be a consultant, and I had told myself, oh, I'll need a lot of years of experience before I can be a consultant. And then when it happened, I'm like, oh, I'm a consultant now. And oh, people are calling me and want to hire me. Holy crap. Cool. This is awesome. And then in regards to being risky with finance stuff, I come from class privilege. So the way I view money is different from those who maybe didn't grow up with as much class privilege. But I'm also someone who doesn't personally have a lot of wealth. So it's been this interesting thing where I grew up with class privilege. So I have this kind of idea of money where it's maybe not as scary, but then I also personally don't have any because I've only been working part-time jobs. So, and I'm dating someone who has a secure job, but we're not married in any way. So it was a little scary, kind of thinking, oh shoot, I have to make rent. I have to make bills. Luckily, because of unemployment, I qualified for state insurance. So I didn't have to pay for insurance. And I'm actually just reaching a point where I'm going to have to get my own insurance because I'm making enough money. So yeah, it's an interesting transition right now for me.
Molly, I'm particularly interested in how you think about your fees and how you charge people? Because I think that that's probably, I'm just guessing here, but I got a feeling that that's probably an uncomfortable position for you to think through what your costs are and how you charge people and how you try and generate profits. And how do you think about that? I'm just curious from your perspective.
Yeah. I really like when I work with people to build trust and to really have an authentic conversation about money and what folks can afford. I do have an hourly, well, I prefer not to actually do hourlies. I do project-based and retainers, but I do kind of base a lot of my projections on hourly. And the first couple projects I did, I did not think much about the budget. And I learned through that mistake that I am worth way more than what those contracts were. So now my hourly, at least where I base off, I'd like to think about between 100 and 150. And then I will think about the scope. I will also think about, since I do equity work, like how in depth it will be, because that adds another layer of complexity and really a lot of emotional labor that I used to think should just be included in evaluation, but I'm trying to be more cognizant of naming, like, this is a lot of hard work. So I used to, now I'm reaching a place where I just keep pushing myself that I need to charge more and make sure I'm making enough overhead to pay bills and to be able to put stuff away. Yeah, did that make sense?
It does. And you know, what I think is kind of a commonality across the three of you, that you all came to your kind of passion of who you want to work with without the first idea of being a consultant. The consultant seems to come along later. So I guess I'm curious, and I'll put this question to Kate, but it can be any of you guys can answer whenever you're ready, but I'll put it to Kate first. What kind of key activities, what are some things that you felt like you had to learn that you're glad you learned, maybe some mistakes that you found along the way in being a consultant, since that doesn't sound like it was necessarily your dream job from when you were like 5 years old, but it became something that became a part of who you are now?
Yeah, so I wish someone had talked to me even in college that this was a career opportunity. I went into college assuming I'd be pre-med. Organic chemistry did not agree with me. So I switched over to social work, and my university had a great 5-year program where you do undergrad and master's in 5 years. And that's how I got connected to kind of the overarching helping profession. It was either that or psychology. And it really ended up being just kind of on a whim that I found this job opportunity doing consulting in South Bend, because at that point I had kind of 2 back-to-back really bad work experiences, to where I was looking outside of social work and things like that. So whenever I interviewed with my boss, or who would become my boss, actually ended up being a great mentor of the consulting side. That's kind of stuff that you can pick up along the way in terms of the actual, like, building the project, doing the project management, all that kind of stuff. As far as the topic areas that we tended to work in, I knew youth programming. I knew, social services. So as far as being able to do the evaluation side and look at outcomes and things like that, it was a transitional period, but the baseline knowledge of kind of what people were supposed to be doing was already there. But yeah, the job of, even evaluator, let alone consultant, wasn't something that was even really mentioned until I stumbled on it.
Elizabeth, Molly, what are some things, just maybe now that I've had a chance to think about what I asked Kate, and she was very graceful and taking my crazy talk, making some sense of it. But I guess my question to you are, what are some skills that you picked up along the way that were invaluable to starting your consulting practices?
I think for me, I'm kind of a natural networker because I'm just curious about what people do and why they got there and how they got there. And I think being able to have those authentic conversations and really connect with people is invaluable. I mean, most of my clients come to me through word of mouth. I submit very few RFPs. I say that, but I'm submitting one this week. But I think that relationship building, you can't really put a price on that, and being able to really connect genuinely with people and just be human and trust that you know how to show up and are comfortable showing up in spaces as you, and that people who align will follow, I think is really helpful. And it's something that I'm constantly reminding myself of. Similarly, I think when I started evaluation, I think I was probably more of the mindset that evaluation was a very technical field. And it's not that it isn't technical and that you need to understand how to run the data and analyze it and communicate it. But I find in my practice, having the facilitation skills and really being able to ask the right questions at the right time and to change people's thinking is, probably what I spend more time on than even running data. And I sometimes joke with my clients that sometimes I feel like a data therapist. And because it's a lot of people who run community-based programs in particular are passionate about what they do. And it can be hard to ask big questions like, well, why are you doing it that way? How do we know that that's working? Insert all the other questions here, right? And you can't, that change in thinking or aha moments, they don't happen in 5 minutes. They happen in 5 months. And so I think having the patience and really being able to sit with silence and ask those questions has been much more of a lesson learned. I'm using a lot more of my social work skills than I would have originally anticipated. All right, Anne says I should trademark that, so I'm just putting that out there. None of you go stealing that idea.
I would suggest if Anne told you to trademark it, she knows what she's talking about. You should probably do that. Molly, did you want to share any tips about consulting that you picked up along the way? Things that, or maybe even mistakes you wish you had, things you've learned.
Sure. I think the things that come to mind for folks who did a master's or took courses in evaluation, or, oh shoot, I feel a yawn coming. Sorry, guys. I didn't sleep well last night. So for folks who took a master's in evaluation or took classes, or maybe you've read books about evaluation, like foundational stuff, from my experience, like learning that foundation was really helpful. It really spoke to me in a lot of ways. That is now how I ended up here. But tips that I would say that I've learned through having some pretty serious stumbling. I guess one is definitely reading and following evaluators who are doing work that is culturally responsive, equitable evaluation. Just because if you don't know the history of evaluation, a lot of it was grounded in imperialism, white supremacy, white dominant cultures. A lot of folks with good intentions, I'd like to think, but now has over years have become there's a lot of built-in assumptions, and there's a lot of, we think because we're the external evaluators, we know what's right. And I totally entered the field kind of like, oh, I learned a thing. I know I'm the expert now. But I feel like what I've learned, and a tip is, I'm definitely not the expert for the community I'm serving. The community and the people who are living the experience are the experts. And you can never assume that the way that you have, or at least I have learned evaluation, is actually what's best for them. So that was a really big learning moment when I've entered spaces being like, oh, I know this really cool thing. And they're like, I don't care. That's not actually helpful for me. And then something that I've been really appreciating is I've been attending workshops on learning how to use more arts-based methods. I've become more of a qualitative researcher. I came from the quant world and went from quant to mixed methods and then to qual. And now I'm like super into using arts-based approaches and really meeting communities where they're at for what could best help them best. So and then of course, power dynamics. Always assess power dynamics and make sure that things are named, and being vulnerable. Those are my things.
So we're at about 43 past the hour, about 17 more minutes. I want to open this up. Anybody who wants to come in and chat or put something in the chat for us to answer, feel free to do that. Amy, I saw your head shaking quite a bit with Elizabeth when you were talking about listening and asking good questions. I don't know if you had any reflections or any questions that you had for Elizabeth. I'm going to keep asking questions, but I just want to make it public that you guys can come in. You can ask a question. You can unmute yourself if you want to ask somebody a question, or you can put it in the chat.
Hey, I have a question. This is a great conversation. Thank y'all so much. And I can come off, I can share. Hey, y'all. So what is something that you wish you would have, someone would have told you earlier on in the process? A piece of advice someone would have told you earlier on.
So for me, I would say I started out in 2016, and I did, I was smart enough to do like QuickBooks self-employed. And then whenever I made the transition to full-time, about 2.5 years later, that's whenever I finally engaged like an accountant and things of that nature. I wish I had started that process earlier because I mean, there's so many policies and rules and all kinds of stuff that no matter how much internet research I do, they are the experts, and you should always rely on the experts.
Yeah, mine is similar. So I also hired an accountant because the financial security piece is the piece that gives me the most anxiety about the business. And so I figured I should pay someone whose job is to actually do that, and they know all of the rules. And that has taken a big mental load off of me. And I've already learned a few things that I had not been doing accurately. So that's been helpful. A couple of things that I think that people gave me advice on that I'm trying to follow now is, one, make sure that you're setting time aside for business planning, because it's easy to get caught up in the doing of the work and not the investing in yourself. So I've hired a couple coaches, and I also try to set aside at least a half day a week to really think intentionally about who I am as a business owner and how I want my business to grow and how we talk about the work. But I think the biggest thing that I am sitting with at the moment is again, realizing how much space and time I need to give myself to unlearn practices that have just been embedded in throughout my life because of this white supremacy culture, and realizing how it's showing up in how we interact and structure our work day and our work contracts. And that surfaces in ways and times that I don't always expect it. And so I'm trying to give myself grace there too. And then the last thing, and then I'll stop taking up space, is I think also just realize what are real challenges and barriers potentially to maybe going full time, and what are some of those more artificial barriers. So for example, I could not come up with a company name. Everyone I wanted was already taken. The domain was already purchased. And like, this was years in the making. I thought, I can't launch a company. It doesn't have a flashy name. And finally, I talked to a few people on this call and a few other people in my life. And I said, Elizabeth, this is a fake barrier. Make Elizabeth Grimm Consulting, start there. That does not the be all end all. You can change, you can stay, whatever, but just start somewhere and stop putting this thing in the way, when, I think that was a symptom of other fears, and I was letting that stop the process.
I think too, it sounds like the three of us have experience in not great work situations, that recognizing that, okay, so I've never ran my own business before. I also have a lot of experience of how I don't want to run it, right? So recognizing that even if you don't have good experience, you have experience to draw on.
I think two things that come to my mind. One is the classic, like, oh, this happened to me. Try not to have this happen to you. But also, I think it's also just part of the journey of being a consultant, I guess. Something I personally am working on in my life is like trusting my gut. I have a lot of moments in my life, even outside of consulting, where I'm like, man, I should have listened to my gut. That would have been good. But if a client just gives you not a good vibe, gives you some red flags, and you have the flexibility to just set that client aside, I'd highly recommend it. I personally, this last year, had a really tough client who pushed boundaries, who was I don't do well with people who yell, and I ended up having to cancel or set a boundary. And then anyways, also I learned a lot about how to have really tough conversations with that client, and then how to end things. And it was a good learning experience. But it's like, man, if I'd trust my gut, that wouldn't have happened. And I wouldn't have had so much of my energy sapped away from this lady person. And then something that has surprised me, that I'm like patting myself on the back, being like, good job, Molly, for doing this. And I didn't know it was going to be so great, is, so I took a lot of workshops, and specifically workshops that were like exactly what I was looking for, like creative evaluation workshops and arts-based methods and evaluation classes, or peer mentoring groups. And through that, I've met amazing people who now I collaborate with. And I also have a couple proposals in that are work that I really want to do, that's grounded in the values and the types of people I want to work with. And it's all thanks to taking a couple workshops where I'm like, ooh, that seems really fun. And then I met other fun people who also thought it would be fun. And I don't know, I feel like that's been a really great thing. And I highly recommend doing that.
Kristen Everett, did you have something you wanted to ask us? You just came on screen.
No, I just decided to come on screen.
No, that's perfect. No, I'm sorry. I did not mean to put you on the spot. One of my questions I have for everybody who guest hosts, and so I like to put this to panelists, is now a good time to start an independent consulting practice? And I think the answer for the three of you, I would hope, would be yes, because clearly, well, you did. So I guess my question to you is why? So feel free to answer that. However, why is now a good time? Or was it just a good time for you and it doesn't necessarily matter to the economy? Take that question. That question can be taken anytime, any way you want to. Feel free to go. Anybody who wants to jump in.
Yeah. So I transitioned to full-time probably summer of 2018 or so. Still being new-ish to doing this full-time whenever COVID hit, I was very much keeping in contact with all of my clients and projects and making sure that as soon as they heard anything about their funding, because at least a lot of the projects that I'm connected with, evaluation comes out of their grant funding because it's required by the grant. So it was just kind of a, well, if programming is shut down and the funder isn't requiring a report this year, like, you have no use for me. So it was a very scary couple of months right at the beginning, whenever everything was so new. But as far as opportunities, I would say that my project load is actually getting bigger because of the kind of work that I do and who I'm connected with. There's so much emergency funding coming out for it that because of it, my projects are getting bigger.
So definitely, yes, the pandemic's been a good thing for you, Kate. Any thoughts, Molly or Elizabeth?
I don't want to say the pandemic's been good for me, but.
Well, no, it's been good for the, well, I mean, I don't know if it's a good thing generally, but I mean, the point is there is more funding available to projects to do the work, and that there's a greater need for our services. So good, maybe not the right descriptor, but I guess the point is there is a greater need for what we do.
Yeah, I think, I don't know. It's definitely been the right time for me. I don't know that I could speak if it's the right time for everyone. Everyone has their own unique situation. I do think I'm seeing, similar to Kate, that there's a lot of need, especially with ARPA funds and before with CARES Act funds, for folks to hire an evaluator. And that's where some of my projects have come from, is, community-based groups or foundations realizing that they needed a data-minded person to help them navigate some of that funding and how it was going out and the impacts on the community. I think for me, even more so than thinking about, like, is there going to be a line of work coming in during the pandemic? It was more that I had reached this point in my life where I could no longer question if I was going to leap. My physical and my emotional health were, having to be put on the side to show up to work every day. And I was like, I have to choose me, or I have to choose the work that I've been doing full time. And that wasn't a question. I had to choose me. And so, I'm still new in the full-time gig. It's been like 4 or 5 months, but from that standpoint, it's been fantastic. And I just kind of have to trust that the work's going to be there. And most of my work is capacity building. And so people are always interested in trying to figure out how their data works and how to think about it differently. So I'm hoping. I don't have faith in the universe all the time. So this is a new trusting exercise that I've been embarking on.
An interesting thing, you don't find a lot of independent consultants that aren't optimists, because you kind of have to just believe it's all going to happen. Because if you're just a pessimist, how could you possibly start a business, right?
Well, and a couple friends and colleagues who are starting to launch right now, I've described it to them as a roller coaster, and you just kind of have to ride the ups and downs. And you know, I have space in my portfolio right now to take on more clients in the fall, and I've also said no to some projects that have come to me in the last couple of weeks because of the gut reaction that Molly was talking about. It just wasn't sitting with me. It wasn't the right time. It wasn't the right format, whatever. And sometimes you have to say no and just trust that something's gonna come along that is gonna be a better fit. But yes, optimism definitely pays off here, man.
Yeah, maybe what I'll just say kind of relates to what Elizabeth and Kate said is whatever is a good time for you is a good time. I've been surprised at the abundance that there is of work and people who are interested in the type of evaluation I'm trying to do and practice. I had another thought I was gonna say. Oh yeah, something also that's helped me with knowing like I want to do this kind of work is there's some firms, actually I posted one, Inspire to Change, who I just admire. I love their work. I respect how they do evaluation and social justice work like intertwined, and they focus on the arts. And I just thought I want to be them. So it was really nice to have an inspiration to strive towards. And then also like being able to have conversations with, for example, that firm for me, and then I'm now going to be collaborating with them on a project. And it's just really exciting to just know there's always opportunities, and find the folks who inspire you and then reach out to them and say, hey, can we talk? So.
Well, we're right at the end of the hour. Any final words, any final thoughts before we close up? Well, with that, we'll wrap things up, and I'll stop the video.